There are people who think AI might become conscious, and now there's scientists, including professors at Sussex University and Carnegie Mellon University, who are testing whether AI is conscious. Now, I feel like every week or two, there's another, hey, AI is conscious, going back to Greg LeMoyne in 2022 when he freaked out at Google because of that. So I know, Greg, you're kind of thinking like, yeah, haven't we already had this discussion before? Isn't this just the same thing repeated over and over? And that might be the case. Can you guys see my article here?
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so we'll discuss this research because it just came out 3 days ago. So to some people, this is super, current and relevant. And the summary here for them is, can we come up with a bunch of scientific tests or experiments to determine the consciousness of a non-human being? And I find this to be interesting in a few levels. So one is, why are we talking about it being conscious? Because it has human language, right? Like that's the thing. If GPT didn't have human language and it couldn't communicate with us, then nobody would consider it conscious. And yet, everybody knows their dog's conscious, or their cat, or the stink bug that's crawling on my ceiling somewhere, right? Like we accept their consciousness at some level. Now, it might not be the same as a human level, but it seems to be missing a huge point when they don't consider that. Am I off base there?
No, all of those things have something in common with humans. They have what's called subjective experience. AI doesn't have subjective experience. It's just a calculator. It has
They're all
calculated.
also living too.
They're what?
They're all living as well.
Well, yes, they're all living too. They're all organic living things.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like the calculator argument is the counter argument to that is always, well, we're just a calculator.
No, we're not.
Like
We're
we're a
mirrors.
calculator, they're a calculator, they're just finally
I
making
promise you,
calculators that are like
there's
us.
lots of things you can push on me, but none of them are actual buttons. I am not a calculator. A
What does it
calculator. A calculator can only do what it's told to do. It can only calculate the numbers. It's just like if you were to take a box and balance it on your finger like this, and then you're holding it like that. You've got two fingers. That's its job. That's what it's doing. It's holding it up like that. And then you move a finger. What happens? The box falls. The box doesn't have a choice. The box falls. There's no choice. It literally will fall. That's all AI is. It's just little levers and little things switching back and forth at very high speed. Okay, calling them levers is probably dumb, but it's still the same thing. It is just calculating. If you leave your temperature and your seed all at the same, and you put some input in, you will get back the exact same output. And if you tell it, hey, you're fat and stupid, you can then delete that and remove that and then tell it, I think you're beautiful and intelligent. It has no subjective experience.
So
All
I
it
think
is,
it is worth pointing out that unlike a calculator, it is non-deterministic,
oh, that's an easier way of saying that.
right? Oh, we got two of me. Good.
Oh, it's Rob.
Um, so yeah, like the calculator, anytime you put it 4 by times 4, it's going to give you 16. Like the AI is not, it's non-deterministic because of the way it's uh, trained. It also is self-learning, which is a difference, to be fair. So you're
Okay.
saying down at the basic level, I don't just have a blank, like the calculator is an interesting analogy because AI that's been trained on all the books in existence still can't understand multiplication,
At all.
right? So it's never actually learned multiplication, even though it can do some levels until you get to like really large numbers. So it
Yeah,
hasn't
well,
learned the
pattern
formula.
completion stuff, which is easy to do with basic multiplication, but once you actually get into real actual math, AI can't do it because AI has no actual comprehension. It has to use a tool to do that.
The way that I was thinking about this recently, and you guys can tell me if this makes sense. So they have AI controlled race cars. And
Yeah,
so let's say you're on the outside and you're watching a race, and the car's going by and you can't see if there's a human or not in it. One car's driving, has a human, one car is driving, doesn't have a human. from the outside, you can't really tell which one is which. And this is where the subjective experience comes in. Now, you will be able to tell because they suck. But if you got a terrible driver and you put the terrible driver against the AI, then you really wouldn't know who was better or if there was a subjective experience or a human or a living thing inside of it controlling the machine. And that's
Yeah.
essentially where we are. So I do find their strategies for determining consciousness to be quite interesting. But how would you know from the external viewing if there was a driver or a machine controlling that race car?
Oh, you wouldn't. It's just like magic tricks, man. It's just like magic tricks. I'm not really pulling my finger off, not really doing it, but it kind of almost not really looks like it. It's the same kind of thing. You can experience something, but that doesn't mean what you experienced was reality.
Here's the way that I think the scientists are, what they're ignoring and what they should be considering. We'll call them edge cases.
Okay.
So, an edge case, let's look at physics because physics is fun. If I believe in Newtonian mechanics and I can explain everything, and then all of a sudden we see light bending around planets, then it's like, wait a second, that's an edge case. Now we could say, let's ignore that edge case because I mean, how often do we deal with that? And the majority of the time, I throw the ball up, the mechanics tells me exactly where it lands. We got projectile motion. Like, come on, what do we need those weird edge cases for? But in consciousness, the edge cases are kind of like that. Like, we might not encounter them every day, but they matter because they tell us about reality. And so these are things like near-death experiences. What's a near-death experience? By definition, it happens when the brain is dead. No neural activity in the brain. So the brain itself cannot explain the experiences that occur. What kind of experiences? One research study showed 80% of blind people can then see and explain what's going on in the operating room and describe things outside of the operating room, including describing things outside of the hospital they were in, verified by third-party interviewers. So if your understanding of consciousness is ignoring the non-physical aspect of, hey, the brain itself cannot account for that because the brain wasn't working, and even if it was working, it doesn't have the visual processing capabilities to be able to see the things that then they're able to describe in this near-death experience. Your understanding of consciousness is limited and certainly is incomplete. Does that make sense? And that's my biggest challenge with looking at any of this research. None of them even consider that. What are the other ones? Terminal lucidity, Alzheimer's patient at the point of death hasn't been able to communicate, brain is not functioning for 10 years, all of a sudden is fully lucid. They can communicate, that they can understand, but the brain physically hasn't changed. Hydrocephalus patient, so extreme hydrocephalus, 95% or more of their brains replaced with cerebral spinal fluid, yet about 5% of them have IQs above 100. Well, clearly most of them are severely disabled, but the fact that any of them have a functioning IQ tells us there's a non-physical, there's something that maybe non-physical isn't the right word, but the brain itself cannot explain it.
It's
And
not
our
the whole
current AI is only replicating neural network of the brain.
thing.
So if that's what we're basing consciousness on, then I can already tell you it's not going to work out because none of that accounts for those three examples, documented, proven scientific examples that I just pointed out.
What we have right now, are nothing but really, really good pattern completion machines. That's all they are. They're really, really cool. But if you break down the math, I mean, if these researchers want, I can show them how a transformer works. I can actually show them the math formulas for a transformer. I can explain how this works and why it's not conscious. It has no subjective experience. I mean, it literally, you can prompt it right now, say something to it, walk away, go on vacation, come back 3 months later and continue the conversation, and it has no clue you left. It knows nothing about time. It has
Doesn't care
no
either.
experience. It is just a pattern completion machine. It's just that you came home and knocked the dominoes down. That's all you did. They're just dominoes you're knocking down. It's a big old Rube Goldberg machine with
And
this tech.
this is what we
So
discuss at length about in our book over here, Soul's Intelligence. Free will. It doesn't have a free will.
Has no will. It does, yeah.
it, that reminds me of our discussion last week about, everybody, not everybody, but lots of people claiming like AI is becoming God. And what they're really saying is like, I feel like Joe Rogan just watched a few too many Marvel movies. And so his definition of God is like Thor or something from a Marvel movie, or
Yes.
maybe like Iron Man, or basically a superhero, which means it can do things that you can't currently do, but it doesn't meet any of the definitions of God.
None.
Being able to create something from nothing. Although he did say some weird thing like, oh, it'll be able to create universes. And I'm like, where's he coming with that? I'd like to see his evidence for how anything's creating universes, or if it is, if it's, I don't know, how it's doing it out of nothing. But the other thing that is relevant to this discussion of consciousness is let's look at the philosophical from a few different angles. So humans have been philosophically, I don't know if defined is the right word, but one of the ways we understand what makes us different is the seeking of the five transcendentals: truth, love, beauty, goodness, and home, or the divine. Home slash divine are the same. And so when somebody says, oh, yeah, A is becoming God, what you're really saying is, okay, well, God is perfect truth, perfect love, perfect beauty, perfect goodness. Who in their world thinks that AI is perfect truth, perfect goodness, perfect beauty, perfect love? Like, what? And that's if you actually understood what was meant by the definition or the word God, and you said, wait a sec, let me apply this test to it, which now I feel like we get to write a whole new chapter in the book, Greg, to address that ridiculous argument. Um, all of a sudden it'd be like, oh, wait a sec, no, it's none of those things. It's not even
It's
remotely
because
close to it. It may be the opposite of those things.
most people just don't have a clear mental picture of God. They're like Joe Rogan and the whole Thor thing, where they see in their mind that candle smoked God that you see from the pews at the church, the old man with the beard and he's up in the clouds and stuff. That's what a lot of people get into their heads when you say the word God. That's what they think of. That's what atheists think of. Atheists think everybody believes in some old man that lives in the clouds and he has a white beard.
Brian, can you pull that page back up?
Yes, but I was just trying to find
Is
God.
because I think that section that was on was actually a very interesting section. So it was talking about a few things. It was like, okay, we as humans think we're exceptional, and our language is what makes us smart, and it's the language stuff. Yeah, driven by human exceptionalists is a blind optimistic that it will happen. That says we associate consciousness with intelligence and language because we do it in humans. But it says, okay, it doesn't always put it all together for other things. For example, animals, but they're still conscious, but they don't have language, they don't have that kind of stuff. And then it says it got a little further too, um, where it says the spark of life. So this whole brings back the whole science fiction
Uh,
Frankenstein thing, right? So everyone thought you could just put all the pieces together and then spark of life together. And
And you show.
literally this is the same concept. Everyone is thinking, oh, it's just this thing, it's just gonna spark to life, spark to consciousness.
right.
And so I think that is the best analogy at this point for it, is because it's not reality. And what this article says is they stopped researching the spark of life because they're like, it's never going to happen. So let's just figure out a small little piece of it. Like, oh, what component of life works, right? How do your blood cells, how does different things function, and so on. And so that's literally where they're going with this, is that like, okay, they're never going to reach consciousness. And it's the Frankenstein thing because of all the reasons you just explained, Brian. Like, it's not just intelligence, it's not just brain. There's other things to it that you have to account for that none of them are. But they're dissecting little pieces. That doesn't mean they won't be able to help with consciousness things or brain things or intelligence or understanding things better, like they did with medicine. Now they understand a lot more about the human body, pieces of it, how it works together. Um, but they're never going to get to that spark of life for consciousness in AI for those reasons you mentioned, because it's more than just that. Just like the spark of life of a living creature is more than just a component, it's more than just a part. Not like, a philosopher's stone where you put all the stuff together and you get a being with the correct stuff. So it's like, no, there are limits that they're never going to reach. And this is one of those just with AI.
Yeah, and
Well,
this is kind of like the caricature. This is what you just said. The lights will suddenly turn on inside the machines and they will become conscious. Like, right. Like if I
okay.
just
Have you heard any of the news from Anthropic in the last week or two? They're Look, they're fanning flames, man. And I like Anthropic. They have great tech, and whoever's doing their marketing is pushing this kind of stuff because they're talking about how their AI will blackmail engineers and will. Oh yeah, there was a whole thing about how their AI was so.
Called PR, Chuck.
Yeah, it's great PR, man, but it's because we have companies like that that are pushing these stories. They want people to think about this and they want people to freak out about it. But I think anybody who actually understands the tech just rolls their eyes.
I don't know if that's true, unless all of the like up to your Elon Musk levels, because we looked at him yesterday saying, "Oh
I,
yeah, it's going to be God." Clearly, he doesn't know what God is, so
well,
that's a different thing. He might understand the tech, but doesn't know God. Um, but it's not clear to me that they actually think this is all like hyperbole
oh, I don't know.
because
I doubt like Sam Altman actually understands the tech at all. I'll
well, that
almost
might be okay.
I'll almost guarantee you he has a guy who sets up his phone for him because he hasn't figured out how to set up his Gmail on his Android yet. That's probably the
Hey,
kind of
what's wrong with that?
Elon Musk, he might be a little bit more technical, but I bet you he's really not all that technical when you get down to it. Probably does not, well, he probably understands more than Altman does by a long shot, but yeah.
I would actually argue the opposite. The people who know the tech don't know the important things that the tech will never achieve. Because most of it's like you're blind, you're going down a path and you don't actually look wide enough to see. I'm not saying all of them. Obviously, there's professors out there who do have that, you know, balance of multiple fields and multiple things going to it. But a lot of the specific people who've worked in AI for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years, they're just on that and that alone.
It's
Um,
like Jeffrey
so
Hinton,
so
right?
yeah, I think there are people who are completely knowledgeable about this stuff, but they're unrealistic because they don't know reality, like we've discussed, don't know the edge cases. But then there are the other ones who have a broader view. They're great at the AI stuff. They're great at philosophy. They understand humanity. They understand all those things that then have a better picture. It's harder to find those people than it is the people who are set and dedicated only on AI and the technology and going to the next level and so on.
Right. So
Yeah,
Jeffrey Hinton understands the tech. He doesn't understand humans. He doesn't know what a human is. He doesn't understand, the examples we gave of NDEs and like all of the things that the consciousness research just ignores because they're edge cases. And so we can just pretend that light doesn't bend around planets. Okay. Like you could do that, or you can have a worldview that incorporates these things.
Chuck, you mentioned something there that actually is in that article. I think further down about it's under the heading "Is AI consciousness already there?" and it's the AI welfare officer for Anthropic saying he thinks there's a small 15% chance that chatbots are already conscious. None of the ones I'm talking to, but this is
Not even close.
amazing. This guy's in some sort of leadership position at one of the like
He
the
knows
leading AI
better.
firms.
He knows better. He knows better. They're just feeding this on. They're feeding it on, man.
He co-authored the report. We should go find that report.
I'm
I
curious what you guys. Go ahead, Chuck.
no, I was just gonna say Anthropic just wants to fan these flames as much as possible. Making AI sound extremely dangerous and scary.
But if you look at the reason, they say it's because they don't know what's going on. So like, oh, if we don't know what's going on, something could be going on that we don't know. Like, oh, it's conscious, sure.
They're watching the race car go around the track and they're saying, well, humans normally do that. So that thing must be conscious because it's driving around a track. And previously, only humans could do that.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's what they're doing. They're creating this structure, theory of minds, and the different ideas that they have for consciousness that all ignore the use cases.
That's
They're
how it works. That's it's called math. It's way above my head, but it's really pretty to look at.
So there's a fun thought experiment, which is if you take the large language model and embody them, right? Give them all the sensors, give them all the stuff, give them living, I don't know, you can say feelings, but they can interact with you, they can talk to you, they have a human voice, they have human skin, they have all this stuff. Does that make them human? Does that make them conscious? Does that make them alive? And you have to think to yourself, what does it actually mean to be alive, be a human, be conscious? If you say, okay, if there's a robot who has a voice, who can sing, who can dance all together and have a whole conversation with you, Does that make it alive? And that's kind of the race car thing you mentioned, Brian, but to the next level. And at some point, it's going to be so confusing and difficult for people to actually to tell the difference that people will not make a difference. They're literally just going to be like, "Oh no, it's alive because it cried at a point in the movie, right? Or it laughed at a point in someone's conversation, or it mentioned that it wanted to have kids, and so on." And so it was like, okay, what does that point look like for you to understand? Okay, am I ever going to be accepting of something that acts and looks like me and is basically just a reproduction? It's not the real you. It's not a living you. It's not a living anything. But is that acceptable to you? And where does that fit into your understanding?
Isaac Asimov was fascinated with the concept, and in the 70s, he wrote The Bicentennial Man, which later became a full-length book, which then Robin Williams was in the movie, and it's all about this exact same concept. It's basically a robot who comes to life, and I don't know if you guys seen the film. Are you familiar with the movie at least? You've never seen the
No,
No? Oh, you should totally check the movie out, man. Or read the book. The actual book isn't called Bicentennial Man. It was
and other
Positronic
stories.
Man. Yeah, it was Positronic Man. I think it came out in the 90s. Yeah, 92. Positronic Man. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, the Bicentennial
The
Man from the
90,
movie.
the 92 book is very similar to the Robin Williams film. The film's not bad. I think the book is a lot better. Like Asimov, it's a great read. But it's the same concept. Basically, it's an android that, for whatever reason, glitches and comes alive. And by the end of the film and or the book, you feel like maybe he is alive, but then he dies. So he chooses to die
The robot does.
so he could get married and have the marriage legally recognized. I'm not saying it's great literature. I'm just saying that it was written. I mean, people have been thinking about this for a while. Since the 70s. Oh my gosh, yeah.
And this is God.
Of the Britons. Your knights of the round table shall have a task to make them an example in these dark times. Good idea, Eldor. Call this a good idea.
Great. Now I'm gonna have to watch that movie this weekend. I
It's
I, I
brilliant.
have I have no choice. I'll
I
literally
know, it's amazing.
and then
This,
follow the life of Ryan. Yeah,
but I feel like if you just asked any of these people what's God, like describe it, that's what they're gonna
that's
come up with.
that's exactly what's in their head.
I don't know, if you look at this article, so I'm curious because a lot of what you've written in the book touches on all the stuff in here. If you look at what is called the dream machine,
Oh yeah.
which is how the article opens up, that all you need to do is click that link, and it just looks like those images were generated by AI, and they're not, but eventually they will be because it'll just read this article and be like, well, that's consciousness. And if you scroll even further down and click on the link, which is about the University of Sussex Center for Consciousness,
That's awesome.
that whole thing's a minefield. There's so much stuff in there.
Not
To
sure which
pull
link you're
apart.
talking about.
It
There it is.
is.
Space computers.
Chuck's used that term before more than once. Yeah, so right at the top, there's an image of a guy in like a podcast booth, and underneath it, there's a link to the Center for Consciousness Science. They don't seem to talk about too much of what you guys mentioned in the book, but I feel like what you mentioned in the book probably might save them millions of pounds on research.
Well, yeah, the problem is what we talk about in the book gets to we look at the scientific side of it, meaning yes, near-death experiences work, they're repeatable, we've measured them, and so on. Yes, there are people with hydrocephalus severely that have high IQs. Yes, terminal lucidity is a common and verifiable thing. But how do I take somebody that's about to die from terminal lucidity and um, analyze that? I mean, they literally do have brain scans and they have done that. That's how we know they're at the point of brain death and there isn't brain activity. So when they describe physical or visual things, they can see that that activity, that poor part of the brain is not active. This is how the counter argument about hallucinogenics can give you the same out-of-body experiences. Yeah, but it can't make blind people see, right? Like, so there's a difference here that has to be addressed. But ask them to go to a funding source and say, hey, we believe there's a non-physical component or at least a component outside of the structure of the brain. Like that's all we could really say from a scientific perspective, that something outside of the brain is providing us with consciousness, with self-awareness, with intelligence, and so on. We want to explore that. You're probably not going to get a lot of funding for it.
From my understanding, what they do is they're not actually trying to identify consciousness. It seems like what they're trying to do is identify parts of the brain that are tied to certain things related to consciousness in human. Like I mentioned earlier, like they no longer look for the spark of life. They figured out how parts of the body work together. That's kind of this thing is they're no longer looking for consciousness. They're looking for how it all ties together. And this little thing you see can affect this part of your brain and how that part of the brain can impact this part of the thing and so on. And so it's
So,
not so,
do you think
so
it's a worthwhile endeavor, Greg?
um I don't see why not. I don't think consciousness is the right term. It's more or less how the brain interacts with things like whatever it is, visual, audio, stimulus, and how our body processes them. Is that consciousness? I don't think so, because, you know, what is actually conscious? No one knows, as you highlighted there. But it will give us a little more understanding of human brain, how things impact us, how, and so on.
And there's obviously an ethical angle of are conscious beings, because this is where this is going. We've already seen this with Mo Gaudet and so on. Oh, if they're conscious, then they have rights. And this is the fundamental challenge of humanity over the 20th century. If humans are just animals, if they're not useful, if they're not productive, then we can put them in gulags and camps and whatever else, starve them through famine, and it doesn't really matter. We'll just make more humans. And so the fully materialist idea of this consciousness, or if it gets to the point, this is where it gets scary. If they come up with this definition of consciousness that ignores all the edge cases, and they say, okay, cool, this thing is conscious. Well, conscious means it has rights, which means it's valued more than child that doesn't meet the same criteria, or a severely disabled person that doesn't meet the same criteria, right? So whatever they're using to measure consciousness, let's say it's a discussion. Let's say it's looking at their brain patterns through the dream machine. Well, there's some human somewhere whose brain doesn't work or who doesn't have the ability to communicate, where none of this, they're not going to pass the consciousness test. And now what? Are they not human? Do they not have value? Like, what's the net result of going down this path? It's it's starting to feel kind of like, I mean, it all comes around to this, but like Nazi experimenting on people they consider to be subhuman. I'm not sure how you avoid that in the long term if you take this to its logical conclusion. It's not to say you can't do the research, but the research has to acknowledge, because any good science research would indicate, hey, here's the limitations of our testing. If you read a research paper and it doesn't say, hey, these are the factors that could be off, or these are our limitations, or these are the conflicts of interest, like these types of things need to be disclosed. So if they're publishing research and they don't say, hey guys, we've kind of ignored terminal lucidity and hydrocephalus and NDEs and in our consciousness research. So those are things we have to consider at some point. But for today, we're just looking at this one area. Like that would be the proper way, I think, to continue this conversation and to have a scientific inquiry, but while acknowledging like there's something else to humans. What do you guys think? Does that make sense?
The edge cases are always fun things. They're really probably explain the most.
What does?
The edge cases.
Oh yeah, of course. And your choice as a human is, do I ignore reality, i.e. the edge cases, and just construct or accept my own predefined reality in its box over here? Or do I incorporate those and say, okay, I really want to know the truth, which does incorporate those, and let's have a serious conversation about them. And that is my concern, that they're not including those, and therefore we're valuing consciousness at a level that could lead to negative outcomes. Particularly if you train all the AIs in the world that are making medical decisions and military decisions and relationship decisions and so on, that yeah, you're conscious and you have worth, but that human being who has a mental incapacity, they don't pass your consciousness test. So sorry, they don't have the same worth. Rob?
I'm not sure I can do a better job of that question than Greg. I feel like I need a lowball one.
What?
I
What
didn't
fun
write
is
the book.
that?
There's so many things in this article that are just interesting to me. I've actually been looking for the contact information for these professors so that you can maybe interview them one on one as well. Because the brainish thing, yeah, here this is interesting. Those guys are not a million miles away from you. Their
They're about
brainish
15 miles away.
interesting. Are
Yeah,
you
so
reading
that's an
that?
interesting argument. Let's actually discuss that one and we'll wrap it up. Do
Okay.
live and Greg, I think you did a little bit earlier with your scenario. So if it had live sensory inputs, does that somehow make it now conscious? And this has been a very common argument that, oh, it will become conscious. That spark all of a sudden it will wake up at the point at which it's embodied, right? In which it has its own body. Because a billion people could be talking to ChatGPT at once, which is like, how is it conscious in all those ways? But since it doesn't have a lived experience of feeling, and I don't know, should we go down the philosophical route with this? How do you want to tackle that first?
I think your car analogy is a good one from the book, which is, oh yeah, it has all these sensors. It can see how fast you're going. It knows how close you are to a wall. It can um, knows when to hit the brake so you don't crash. But if it does crash, it's not experiencing the crash as a human, as a living being, as a that. It has a perception of a crash, right? Oh, it's destroyed this sensor and that thing's gone and it's bad. Don't do it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's living, it's conscious, it's any of that stuff. So just because you add more sensors, just because you add a large language model to it, doesn't change the fact that, you know, it's missing an experience, let's put it.
Yes, let's walk through the um oh it's not coming up with a book. Maybe it will here, but by there's a book called Seeing Red, written by a um modern psychologist, also a materialist atheist. And so let's walk back through the philosophy here. So he would say that um, you have two components. You have perception and you have experience. And so he actually worked with a monkey that had a visual cortex. I believe it was either damaged or removed, and like he cared for it. And he talks about the fact that you could actually like it can't see. It does, that part of its brain doesn't work, but that it could sense things like a ball or other things. He also knew, I guess he did tests with a woman who had a similar no ability to see, and he would do things like say, "Hey, I'm holding something in front of you. What is it?" And she'd be like, "What are you talking about? I can't see." And he's like, "Just guess." And she'd be like, "It's a red ball," and he'd have a red ball. And so she was perceiving it, but she had no experience of the red or of the ball. And so her whole life was kind of that way where there was no real, like she could anticipate things, it would feel like, or intuit them. But the connection between the perception and the experience, right? That's the difference between a thermostat or a car that has a crash sensor and a human that has a crash sensor being pain, right? Those are two different things. So if we look at Seeing Red, I think Humphreys was the guy that wrote that book, and you go back a step and we look at the book Thinking Fast and Slow. So Daniel Kahneman wrote that book. He also is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and so he talked about thinking fast and thinking slow. Well, that's an interesting parallel. What's the thinking fast? It's your perception. It's your immediate gut reaction. It's somebody throws a hammer at you, and your reaction is to duck. Your reaction isn't to say, "I wonder where that hammer's coming from. I wonder who threw that at me." Like number one, you move fast, and number two, you say, "Okay, who threw the hammer at me?" Now that's the secondary reaction to it, which to me feels very much like the perception. She could identify or recognize there was a ball, but she had no experience of it. We'll go back even further. We go back to the 13th century to Thomas Aquinas, and he talked about the uh, antecedent and the consequent will, which were almost perfect parallels, I think, to the thinking fast and thinking slow. So 700, 800 years later, science kind of backed him up in saying that yes, there is this initial gut reaction, emotional reaction, the antecedent will to whatever you're exposed to, but then there's the consequent where we have the ability to judge what's the proper reaction. So somebody threw a hammer at me. Well, it was a plastic hammer that my 18-month-old threw at me. So is the reaction the same? Is the consequent the same if it was Chuck who threw it at me? I mean, you now have the moral capability with your consequent will to say, okay, there is a moral imperative here, or there's a moral question, or there's a proper or an improper reaction to it. That whole secondary thing from Humphrey's experience, from Kahneman thinking slow, back to Aquinas of the consequent will. I don't think it has it. I don't think that AI has that, and I don't think they have a way to even determine if it does. Love throwing in that philosophy right in the middle of a fireside chat here. Um, Anything else of intrigue that popped out to you from the article, Rob? Oh, that's not the article. This one is.
Yeah, no, I think to me it's just the fact that so many people are doing research into consciousness, which I think to me is super interesting, really, really interesting. But they seem to be taking different approaches to it. The dream machine seems a little bit out there for me.
I'm curious,
It
why do you
just seems
find it interesting? What's interesting about it?
about people studying consciousness.
I mean,
Yeah, well, I feel like it's the fundamental core of being alive, right? Consciousness. So I feel like the fact that it's taken us this long to get to studies, or maybe we've been studying it before. I don't know. I could be wrong here, but I just find it very interesting that we still don't know as a race like that much about ourselves. Like we can get to the moon and we can get to other planets, but we don't really have the first clue about ourselves or like anything outside of it. Like in terms of creation, I guess. Obviously, depends what you believe in. So yeah, that is interesting, and I just think the fact that people are going about it in such a different way. But yeah, I keep coming back to that dream machine thing just because I find that the fact that I got a mention on the BBC is kind of astounding to me because it just seems like an art installation, not a project. And when you look at their website, the whole thing just looks like something you'd see on Sora or something, or like an image generation website. So
Explain the dream machine.
so the Dream Machine essentially is you can see, I think if you scroll on the Dream Machine website, there's a link to the Dream Machine website. If you look at it, you can kind of scroll down and see people kind of laid back, and there seems to be a huge orb above them. And from what I understand, there you go, that's the image. If you lay down and close your eyes, there'll be a series of flashing strobe lights, which will then project your consciousness onto the back of your eyelids. Kind of find that a little bit. I don't believe that. Let's say, um, but okay. And then they've got a bunch of images there that say, "Hey, this is what people see. This is their unique experience." I don't know if they've gone so far as to say consciousness. I thought they did somewhere in the article, but yeah, this just seems like something that AI is going to copy. Everyone's like, "Told you, it's conscious, it's alive."
This is not what people are thinking. As a marketer and a student of psychology, to tell me that these are the things that people are thinking on the regular,
huh.
um, I'm gonna
I
go
think it's more of
no.
that's what they're seeing in this dream state, right? Like in this machine, as lights are blinking and flashing, this is their perception of what the environment's happening.
Yeah, I mean this is something, but it's certainly not representing with the thoughts that people are having at any given time. There's
The
I
So
would be
DNA
interested
ones.
to see if they like provoke people, right? By
I thought
like
those
giving
were
them
letters
something.
you put on your tongue. Those are pictures that they. I get it. Never mind.
What is it?
What? Those are neat.
I think
Oh, these are
most,
what people drew. These didn't actually come
yeah,
from the machine.
yeah, correct.
So they're only drawing the things they want to draw.
Yeah, yeah. It
I
sounds like
think
a fun thing to do. I mean, I would go hang out there for an hour, lay in the bed, and then draw.
Sure, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm up
Yeah.
for
supposedly there are like sensory deprivation things that also cause some kind of like hallucination or peace or seeing things or whatever. That's an interesting
Yeah,
idea as well.
But if
in your
if
brain.
you go back to that BBC article, though, it says what the purpose of this is, and it says so. And you can quote this: the dream machine brings the brain's inner activity to the surface with flashing lights, again, I don't know how they're proving that. And the images I've seen are unique to my own inner world and unique to myself. Okay, fair enough. They believe these patterns can shed light on consciousness itself. That's the bit where I'm like, oh, how? Like, tell me.
So
Well, because
that could be interesting.
consciousness is all based on light patterns, so sure.
I wonder if you could then test like the severe hydrocephalus person, like what would come up for them, and if it is the same, like it's not much different, it's the same sort of experience as somebody that has a full brain, then it would suggest to me obviously that the brain isn't all that's necessary. There's something else that's a significant component. You potentially could do it with timing. I don't know, with terminal lucidity. If you set up research at a hospice care facility or something like that, and then yeah, put them on this sort of portable dream machine thing, because it says this is a version of it. Um, you could probably get that research as well and see. Again, if my hypothesis then would be if it functions the same once they're in their lucid state as everybody else, then clearly there's something outside of the structure of the brain that is presenting consciousness. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the fully because I don't understand the dream machine fleshed out, but that would
I,
be my initial reaction.
I think at this point, consciousness is so hard to solve. They're grasping for other areas that could lead to better understanding, and Dream Machine is just one of them. If you look at science, like most of it looks like science fiction. They're just making up crazy experiments. Sometimes they prove something, sometimes they find data that proves something totally different. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing here is one of those interesting uses of scientific theory or discovery, learning more that might seem crazy and makes no sense. And it might, they've used science to see how fast a shrimp can run. Like, who knows why they're doing stuff, but they're at least trying to identify more things about the brain. And that's why I think it's not necessarily consciousness per se, but just how your brain interacts with the lights and the stuff and your perceived things you see and so on, which could lead to stuff or it could just be a fun time, Saturday night.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not saying that this is not important. I think most scientific studies, most of them sound completely out there, and you're like, really? But then you don't know where that leads, right? I mean, that literally is the point. But I don't know if this to me is consciousness. But Chuck made a good point about being light and sound. I've never thought of it like that before. So I guess I don't know.
You can be conscious without eyes or ears.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
this is
Yeah.
getting to what you were saying, Rob, that like I think it's like 50 or 60% of published research cannot be replicated, which is like a hallmark of science, like science is
Yes.
repeatable. So yeah, that's a whole different discussion. That doesn't mean science is bad, it just means the process has some errors in it that need to be worked out. So the summary here is understanding consciousness, understanding the human brain is obviously very beneficial and useful and interesting. When they start sensationalizing it to saying, oh, we're going to determine consciousness or we can measure consciousness while ignoring the edge cases, you're just not being, at the very least, scientific because you're ignoring the data and the information that we have that would suggest that your current theory is correct. All right, then we'll wrap it up there. Till next time.